Independence of Ernest Hancock, special edition, no commercial interruptions. We're just going to yak it. And we can't wait until Monday because it's Sunday and it's going to be Monday. And I always say, I haven't done this in a long time. I really wanted to do this with James Corbett, thecorbettreport.com. And I wanted to do this because I knew Monday or wait till his next regular scheduled appearance, which would be, a week from this coming Wednesday, would be too long. And I've been around long enough and remember the psyops of all the be feared and why and said what happened. Then you find out decades later what really happened, who did what and why, and you can see the same kind of operation being done on our brain cells now. So I'm going, no, I need to have this understood now because it's starting to unfold. We were always of the opinion it's going to be when the debt starts getting called in, when the petrodollar gets abandoned, when, Federal Reserve System comes up against any competition, when you have so many things that would be dominoes after the petrodollar fell, and it looks like it's underway. So I didn't want to wait any longer, at least understand how fragile it is when the people's opinion, and certainly that of a lot of other economies, just say, not so much. Then what? Well, we might find out. And there's a lot of little signs going on. We'll talk a little bit of history, but the news as it's unfolding right now is something that we need to know. I've always said, and a lot of people didn't really understand what I meant when I said it won't happen all at once, but it will happen overnight. And the point that I'm making is that, it won't be all at once. It's not one thing. It's just like breaking dawn. You can see it coming. Here it comes. It's like, the sandstorm. Yep, here she comes. It's calm now, but I see it coming. Well, now I'm thinking it will happen overnight. And overnight, maybe a Monday, maybe tomorrow, but it's going to be, soon, or soon. Hell, it's a day sooner than what we were worried about before. It's just going to continue to get closer. So I think we need to understand what's happening. And I don't know anybody better to do that than James Corbett. Now, he wrote an article, What You Need to Know About the Saudi Purge. And I've read it, and I've read a bunch of other stuff, and we've had a lot of guys over the years come up, kind of letting us know we're building up to this or something like this. And I think this is here. But I want to, probably first off, we're going to try and do this in an hour as fast as we can without commercial interruption. So I got to ask James, where do you think we start? Is it historical? Do we go back, with oil? Do we go back with Lawrence of Arabia, the First World War? Do we go back after, the Bretton Woods? Do we go to, the petrodollar with Kissinger in the early 70s? Do we go to, how far back do we got to go?
That's an excellent question, and one that I think most people wouldn't be perceptive enough to ask, because these kinds of questions really are the fundamental point of all of this. This isn't a single thing that's happening right now in the midst of things. It is something with history that goes back decades or centuries, depending how far back you want to go. So I think the real way to approach this is to take a look at what's happening and then, you follow those threads back as far as we can to where they originally lead. And I think a lot of them do lead back at least a century to World War I, the carving out of the modern-day Middle East. That happened as a result of the First World War and the backroom deals that were going on in the drawing rooms in Paris and what have you. That's where so much of this, what we now understand as the Middle East, began. And also, you could go back to Lawrence of Arabia and all of that stuff. And oil obviously plays a huge role in this and the machinations of the oligarchs. So I don't know. It's an excellent question, and it's an important point to keep in mind for all of this discussion, no matter what we end up talking about, is that there is so much history behind this.
I know, so I need to know, damn, and you're one of the guys. I've read a lot of things that were before the internet really got going. And that's, if it wasn't for that or some of the Patriot conspiracy, John Birch, whatever the heck, that later you find out they were mostly right about everything. So I'm going, this is, you're in the new era. You're having such enormous amount of resources available to you, and you know where to look. And then you have a lot of the Corbetteers, a lot of your supporters and followers and helpers out there scouring the, this is what we were looking at when Max Headroom came out, in the 80s or something, which was a TV program. I'm at the age at 56, born in 61, graduate 79 in high school. And my thing is that I can see in retrospect all of the repeats of the same kind of mind screws that they're doing now, and for the same reasons. And it seems like it was always our hegemonic, unilateral, we get to do whatever we want the way we want because we can. And oh, by the way, we got, big guns and satellites and fighter planes and stuff. So it's been to me that soon shall pass. I mean, it can't sustain the way it is and put everybody under that fear, that tension, and it benefits like everybody in the government and up, other than the people. And I'm seeing the awareness from the work that you're doing. The people are starting to be able to embrace what's happening and why. It's a philosophy. It's a thing. It's an entity that's eating everywhere. But it starts somewhere. It's an idea, and that's where you got why they did big oil conquered the world, and then and how those are fascinating documentaries. But it has a beginning, and there's something we got to go biblical. Do we have to just go a philosophy? What do we got to be afraid of before we define what it is that's going on now so we understand it in context?
Well, you're right. I mean, fundamentally, as we've talked about before, this is about an ideology. It is about the ideology of oligarchical collectivism, which is what Eric Blair, a.k.a. George Orwell, called it in 1984. That was what Goldstein was writing about. Right? So, but yeah, it goes, I mean, I don't know how you're going to define this. Everyone's going to have their own perspective on it. I think fundamentally it is just a mindset that exists in some people, and for whatever reasons. And we've talked about psychopathy and how that contributes to the overall oligarchy and their construction. You could go biblical and religious if that's your thing. I mean, that's above my pay grade. I'm not going to solve all of those kinds of questions, but fundamentally this mindset exists, and it exists because it is effective for the purposes of controlling vast amounts of people, or it has been effective for controlling vast amounts of people. The question going forward is, can they continue to maintain that grip throughout this technological revolution that we're living through? And the real question on the other side of that is, I mean, once we go through this transhumanist whatever, buckle in, because it is coming. Once we go through that, will it be the democratization of this technology so it's in everyone's hands and we all go forward into the future together? Or will it be a small controlling oligarchy ruling over everyone else with the power of that technology in their grasp? And that's the real question that will define the 21st century.
And that's how deep, I think this really goes. For they, them, those to rule us or to get us to comply or be willing slaves or, THX 1138 with, Robert Duvall, they have to change us. It's chemical or it's electrical, electronical, whatever. They're going to do to get us to be more submissive. It's whatever is in the water, the air, the food, whatever, the plastics. I mean, vaccines. I mean, you just go on and on and on. There's dials that somebody's turning, and it's never to your benefit. It's always you're just to be exploited in whatever way, regardless of how evil it is. They just find their niche and they do whatever. And the service that we're expecting from, I guess, I don't know, from anybody. I just say free market, whatever I'm willing to pay for it. But this idea that herds us as a societal being is being plucked all the time to convince us to make somebody king, or repackage it in whatever way, and they get to rule us. And every time you scratch the surface, it's bad. It's really bad. And it's got really bad people behind it, forcing it into existence, willing it, making you fund it, whatever it is. And there's something wrong with them. I mean, I've been around long enough to meet these people. A lot of them are just insulation. There's the real powers back behind that, and it's even darker. So I'm not trying to say it's a spiritual evil thing or something, but many people would. My thing is that I can't combat it until I understand it. And what you've done, James, is kind of understand these people just absolute power corrupt, and that's absolutely, it's like a drug or something. I don't know if it attracts bad guys or makes them, but we're in a situation now to where I need to understand the importance of the House of Saud in what's happening, because it seems to me that part of the deal they made with the, whether the devil, the angel, or whatever was their perspective, it's coming unraveling. And I'm just wanting to know how that's going to manifest itself.
Was that a question? Yeah, where do I dig into that?
I know. I'm trying to get you to monologue, man.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, okay, so now we're swirling around the events in Saudi Arabia and the House of Saud. So for people who don't know, Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy, and it is a constructed monarchy. It isn't some sort of organic thing that came from the soil. This is a certain family that was selected to rule the country because they would play ball with the right, global international elite players. And that's seen going back to the grandfather of the family, the Ibn Saud, who founded the modern state. But more specifically, I was at a meeting with FDR on Bitter Lake in 43 or whenever that was, to cut the original deal for Saudi Arabia to be under the U.S. military umbrella and to have that relationship so that, of course, they would be the steady supply of oil for the American empire. And that relationship moves forward into the 70s, where you have the formation of OPEC, and specifically with OPEC taking their position as this admitted open cartel, I mean, that's what it is, to manipulate oil prices. And in 1973, as a result of the Yom Kippur War, which, oh, by the way, was largely engineered by Henry Kissinger. That part often gets excluded from the history. But anyway, Kissinger definitely had a role in what was going on with the Yom Kippur War. But as a result, as retaliation for that, OPEC decides to raise oil prices. They raise oil prices by 400%, which is interesting because that is the exact amount that just a few months before the Yom Kippur War started, before all of this crisis that generated this need for a 400% rise started, the Bilderberg group was meeting in Sweden that year, and they were envisioning, what if there was some kind of crisis to the oil supply? And what if oil prices went up by, 400%? That was literally what they were talking about a few months before all this kicked off. So that's exactly what happened, and of course created the oil crisis, which I'm sure you'll remember from your youth, Ernie.
Yeah, this was, this is the one thing that I was hoping we'd get to so I could share what I remember. When you had the time that you would just go ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, when you would do that and you think you're being responsible, you start to become a young adult or even teenager, or you had your attention because the TV was on during every dinner because the Vietnam War was going on. When all this is going, all this strife, you had, people in the streets and the civil rights protest. You had just had, less than a decade before Robert Kennedy killed and JFK, and it was just, there was a lot of tension, even as a junior high kid or elementary and so on, and your parents talk and they have their friends over and you're not over there playing Nintendo, you're hiding behind the couch listening to everybody talk, So this is, the feeling that I got was that Saudi Arabia was the center of the universe at this time because we needed to be fearful that we didn't have enough oil for our high standard of living, and it had to be imported, and we got to be, you want your way of life, we got to be willing to go to war. And those commie bastards that want to slow us down in any way, well, we got a bulldozer for them, So it was an idea that we were like Klingons or something. We got to go, we're going to go kick ass for the empire. And they counted on patriotism, and I've seen that tool has been less effective as the internet has caught on and people can openly question. But then what's starting to happen is what you knew was going to happen is wherever they can throttle down that dissent, disincentivize it, not allow it to be incentivized. The YouTube and Google and Facebook and Twitter and all the crackdowns, that is just driving, they're squeezing, the balloon, it's going to pop out. And one of these, that's popped out has been James Corbett. It is amazing over the time that I've been doing media and talking and activists and all that, a lot of people, they'll point to different things. There's a lot of fee work. Foundation for Economic Education was a really effective thing that seeded a lot of stuff in the 60s and 70s. Then, and they still do now. They're on a new tear, so they're doing well. You have a a lot of their other organizations that was influential to me, Future Freedom Foundation with Jacob Hornberger. And that, there's little freedom dailies that you would read, and James Bovine, there's just some. And then they start to open and blossom a little bit. And then the investigative reporters that give you regular stuff like James on things that are important that you are telling him he needs to look at. I do the same thing. I try to encourage him to go on to different stuff. All I want to add to in this conversation is some of the things in his article that brought things to mind, and to give you a perspective of how I feel the same PSYOP coming. I can feel that it's the patriotism of, there's not that much support there. They got to make something happen. And that's, I always say, yep, Golden Gate Bridge, St. Louis Arch, toast. I mean, they got, some iconic symbol's got to go. And I'm worried about that. And I don't want us to under or overreact in the wrong way or something. I mean, it's just so we're informed. And that's why I'm so supportive of the work that you do, James. But I want to run it along here. When you say, we'll get to that in a minute. This one right here, remember this name, Kushner. You're talking about when Kushner went and was putting together, before all this, a $110 billion Saudi arms deal. Now, I remember that when they were talking about it, and it just kind of got brushed off as just a regular doing business, and it didn't get emphasized enough. Would you do that for our audience, please?
All right. So at the time, I did write an article about that arms deal that I'll direct people to, and it was called "What They're Not Telling You About the Saudi Arms Deal." So this $110 billion deal has been slightly overblown, and they're adding some figures in there to make it into $110 billion. But but the long and short of this is there's a couple of things going on here. One is that Saudi Arabia is or has been, at least, who knows if this is a change in direction with the purge, but they have been trying to buy the good graces of the United States as part of their quest for regional dominance right now, because clearly the Middle East is in a state of flux. And for a decade and a half now, since the whole restructuring that's been taking place with the Afghan-Iraq wars, it's been an open question as to who's going to step into the power vacuum. Now, what ultimately resulted from Iraq War II there is that Iran, it greatly bolstered their position. That, in fact, Iran has gained something of a political foothold, as it were, in Iraq, and has more influence in Iraq than, obviously, they would have done if Saddam was still in power, let alone, whatever else would have happened organically in the region. So that has been a very bad thing for the House of Saud in particular, which is against Iran. It's not so much, I think, the Saudi Arabian people that have a hatred in their heart for the Iranian people per se. Again, this is power politics of power players. And the Iranian Revolution of 1979, one of the things that it portends is the idea of some sort of Islamic overthrow of the emirs and kings and monarchs of the Gulf states, including, of course, Saudi Arabia. So I think the House of Saud does see the writing on the wall, because Saudi Arabia, it has to be kept in mind that this is still a tribal nation. And King Ibn Saud, the founder of the modern state, he had, I think it was 45 sons, something like that. So when he dies, there's this huge question as to the succession and, who's going to rule this kingdom. And there's at least three different power factions, three different kind of family lines and tribal elements within that House of Saud, and they're all vying for control. So the way it has functioned, more or less, with some intrigues and some blow-ups here and there, but more or less functioned, is that the powers of the state of Saudi Arabia, the various security forces and what have you, have been divided up between those three tribal factions. And there's kind of been a balance of power there. What has just happened with this purge, this really spectacular, transformative purge, whatever you want to call it, is the consolidation of all of that power within MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the king, the son of the current king, King Salman. A very important move, because that takes away that balance of power that had delicately balanced those three tribal factions within the House of Saud.
Don't lose where you left off here. But as you're explaining that, thank you. I want you to continue. But MBS, I see that as a constant referral to him. Of course, it's his initials. Is that like, I'm wondering why. Is that to distinguish him? Because it's easier? Because you have to say it so many times? Is it a brand? Is he selling Nikes? I mean, where's that coming from?
That's a good question. Everything I read and everything I see refers to him as MBS, and I think it is a common, well, at least in English, obviously. I don't know what.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering. It's pushed so much. Is it because everybody's just lazy, or is it a branding thing?
Personally, I do it because it distinguishes King Salman from his son Bin Salman, Mohammed bin Salman.
Well, that may be. Yeah, it's like W. Bush, or something.
Exactly, right.
So
Bush 42 or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason I bring that up is that when you consolidate power like this, you either do it under a philosophy or you do it under an individual. And they definitely chose the individual. This is an individual thing. This is not, for truth, justice, and the Saudi Arabian way, or, women get to drive forever or something. I mean, this is not a philosophical thing. This is a consolidation of Game of Thrones power thing, and it looks like they didn't leave a whole lot to chance. But the one thing I also want to get up to is from this Kushner deal and them doing all these arms. And it seems like Trump's at least, if not facilitating, kind of, we'd be buds and stuff. And there's been this relationship, or he understood he needed this relationship from because I'm an international man of mystery, and I got businesses and we do business and art of business. Okay. So I'm going, all right, now I get the impression that this was not a coup inside the House of Assad. It was more like a coup against interest that involved, the intelligence community, the banking industry, the oil oligarchs. I mean, this has been a flip of a switch. They're going to start going to China and other competitive markets and currencies. The petrodollar gets ignored or abandoned, and Trump sees this or saw this coming or encouraging it or allowing it or just wants to survive it or something. So that's kind of where I want to get, but I'm wondering what history we need to find the answers out to those questions.
Well, what role Trump and the Trump administration and Kushner, more specifically, is playing in this that's a very good question, and one that I don't have the definitive answer to. I don't know what their angle is on this yet, other than to say, as I was saying, I think Saudi Arabia is trying to position themselves as the leader, the regional dominant power of the Middle East. So they are doing things like the war on Yemen, which is seen as a proxy war in Iran. They're clearly ginning something up with Lebanon here with the abduction of the prime minister.
Don't breeze by these for me, James, man. I mean, when you go the Yemen thing, I never really got a full beat on this Yemen thing. And then, it comes out that of course we've been always buddies with Israel in our joint effort that we don't like Iran. I mean, and then this Qatar thing, I never really, all I got out of it when it was going on was this. Well, Qatar, the other Arab states on the peninsula, they don't like them none too much because they paid a ransom to some bad guys that got money, so they can get one of their brothers back. But it was really a deal or a negotiation, something. They just want to tarnish them in some way. And then stuff happened and I lost interest. So I'm going, but Qatar keeps coming back. Are they breaking with the fold or something, or not getting in line, or they're aligning with something else? Then you got Saudi Arabia being buds with Israel, as long as we all can hate on Iran. And why do we hate Iran so much? And then Yemen. So start with Yemen. What the hell do we give a crap? And we got the Congress voting money to go kick the living crap out of Yemen. What is that all about, please?
Oh, well, it's about supporting the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, ultimately, because that's ultimately what this war ends up doing, is supporting and strengthening AQAP, who, of course, are the mortal enemies of the U.S. and the side of righteousness, right? Unless it's against their interests. So what's happening in Yemen is complicated, and I don't have all the research in front of me, but it has to do with this Houthi-led insurgency against the government that was in power in Sana'a, in the capital of Yemen, back in 2015, when they stormed Sana'a and took over, or overthrew that government that had been sitting there. And so Saudi Arabia is waging a war on those Houthi-led rebels, or whatever you want to call them, who are trying to take over or trying to become the government of Yemen. Now, that's important because the Houthis are seen as a proxy, not a proxy force, but are being supplied and supported by Iran. So people are seeing this as, oh, this is Saudi Arabia going after Iran, the Iranian, brigade in Yemen, as kind of a proxy
theory
war.
Of freaking Southeast Asia.
One more time?
The domino theory of Vietnam and Southeast Asia and
something
Korea,
like that.
communism just, if we don't nip it here, it'll grow into a blah, 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 blah.
To the extent that Vietnam or North Korea was a proxy war between the U.S. and Soviets, I mean, I guess you could put in those kinds of, in that framework.
No, it's how they sell it.
Of course,
Lord knows what the reason is. It could be, somebody, just the honor of whatever the heck. You have no idea what happens. The thing is that they got to sell it, though. And it's always, if we don't nip it here, it's going to grow into, and you won't be able to watch your big screen TV with your harem anymore, So allow us to go lay waste, to these mud huts because they might hurt you someday. Pinky swear. I'm just, it always turns out being, I wouldn't believe anything anybody says anyway. You want to give who benefits. Cui bono, man. I mean, it's who.
Well,
who
I mean, yeah. Let's deconstruct their narrative because there has never been any really definitive or convincing evidence that the Houthis really are being fundamentally supported by Iran, or that Iran has secret control over them or anything like that. So it is an excuse to a certain extent. It really does give the big question mark as to why. I mean, why does Saudi Arabia care so much about Yemen being one of the poorest nations on the planet? I mean, this is not a strategic or there doesn't seem to be any geostrategic purpose to
There's
this.
Something else going on.
Yeah.
And I've been interviewing a lot of people. I'm sure you have too. Whenever Yemen comes up, we get this kind of, we don't know. I've talked to various different people that, add a little bit more to it. Just mainly it's just aid work and how bad it is. That's the only news I can get is how bad it is. The cholera of how bad it is, the starvation of how bad it is, and I'm going, and they close down more ports. They prevent more aid. You only get it if you swear allegiance to. I mean, it's kind of, it's like watching Chronicles of Riddick,
right?
Right. So
and it seems pretty open knowledge at this point, although it's officially denied, but it seems open knowledge that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, was the architect of this Yemeni adventure for
right, which
Saudi
is what
Arabia.
I'm seeing that, also, and I'm asking why when he got in charge of, some portion of the army at least to be doing this, and he went and did it, and I'm going, to what purpose? To consolidate or learn how to shoot, bazookas or something? I mean, I don't, why? And he's parlaying that into now I'm king. This doesn't bode well, man. This sounds like a bad freaking mythological story.
Yes, it does. I think you're right. And again, the questions of his motivations in the Yemen war in particular is an open question. But clearly, I think he has been consolidating power from his position as defense minister, but also in charge of various other parts of the Saudi government to basically flex muscles, show that I'm the one in charge, that I'm making the decisions here, and this is my baby. So I think that has to be part of it. And
well, let's move on to Syria. I want to know what his role in this Assad thing and so on too. These all these things start to tell a story here. You've uncovered a lot of stuff here. I'm just going, there's a pattern here somewhere. So what's his view and input and future of Assad?
Well, you see, actually, this gets even more complicated, and it gets into parts that I'm still researching myself. So I don't have the answers for you. But I do know that Bandar Bush, we all remember Bandar Bush, the prince, the Saudi prince who was so close to the Bush family that he got the nickname and all of this, was at some point, I mean, there's been some intrigue going on with him for years now as to he was being reported as dead, but then he's suddenly alive again, and he's meeting with Putin in Moscow, and he's the head of the security services in Saudi Arabia all of a sudden, and then he isn't. And this year he's been arrested in Saudi Arabia. What on earth? What's going on? He definitely had a part in engineering what was going on in Syria at least 3 or 4 years ago. He was helping supply the Salafi jihadists who were attempting to overthrow Assad. He was arranging some of that. There are implications that he was involved in the chemical attack of 3-4 years ago, whatever. They tried to pin on Assad. So he's been floating around there, but now he's being taken out as part of this purge. So there is another level of intrigue to that, and perhaps MBS is trying to clean up after, Syria. Okay, Syria's a failure. Let's clean up that operation and get moving forward. That's a complete speculation on my part at this point, but there's some intrigue going on there within. Again, this is all internal to Saudi Arabia.
Well, this seems like the targeting are the guys like this. It's all that Bush, Cheney, Halliburton, they, them, those from the 80s, 90s, and that crowd. And the Clinton dynasty was perfectly willing to dovetail with that. And then here comes this Trump thing, and with Kushner going and making deals with, while Russia is selling gazillions of dollars worth of defense missile systems, and China's wanting to say hello to Saudi Arabia. Oh, Aramco, your whole oil thing. I saw you reporting they're just going to buy the whole damn thing. So I'm going, this is not the same Middle East that, Cheney and Bush and Rumsfeld and all these, Wolfowitz, all these guys were part of. It seems like the connections to them in Saudi Arabia are the ones being purged.
Right. I think one of the ways we have to look at this is that as I'm trying to paint the picture here, Saudi Arabia is trying to become this regional leader, and they're trying to, so we'll wager a war on Yemen, we'll go into Syria, we'll be the ones that are setting the agenda here. They're trying to throw their clout around at this moment, I think partially because the writing is on the wall for the House of Saud, both internally with the breakdown of whatever balance of power was going on, but also existentially, just the economic existence of Saudi Arabia is called into question in this era where we are all being told we're going to be transitioned into the post-oil era. For what does that mean for a oil kingdom that has been founded and based on oil revenue? It means the end, unless they change everything. And that's the way that MBS is being sold to the public right now. He's the reformer. He's going to change everything. And look, he's changing this. He's changing that. He's 32 years old. He's got young, fresh ideas and all of this. City in the desert, $500 billion neom. Up there in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia that they're going to carve out of the desert, and all of this crazy technology they're going to use to make it. And so this is the way he's being sold right now. And I think that is part of the way he's trying to position Saudi Arabia, is to, in a way, fail forward gloriously. This is the end of the oil era. We'll take all of our reserves and all of that money and everything we have, and we'll push it into something else, and we'll become the leaders.
Okay, now this is where I'm thinking that the West, if you have that much debt, I think 80% or something of the national debt rolls over every couple of years. To whom? Who's doing that? Well, it's China, and it used to be, and when I late 80s, early 90s.
You're talking U.S. national debt.
Yeah, it was West Germany and Japan, Netherlands, that kind of thing. And that's why you had the trilateral commission that was Japan, Europe, and North America. And I'm going, and I remember growing up that was the powerhouse economics of, but the U.S. still dwarfed everybody. Well, everything's changing now. And, that influence that we had with the dollar and with our allies and whatever associations they have, but you could always count on it. Kind of had the same banking system, with cryptocurrencies and competing banks, and they'll drive vermouth like an atomizer, a little bit of gold on some currency, and that'll be enough. It's so fragile, it almost doesn't matter. And what's happening right now, I'm trying to get a beat on if this is it, because it seems like it could be it. But I've had that feeling several times, and they always pull something weird out of their butt, and I have no idea, and it's usually a war. So the wars, the escalation of ouch, quit it, whether it's fictitious or not, is mostly where? Are we looking at Middle East stuff? Is it Sea of Japan? Is it Europe and Russia? Is it, where do you think we're most fragile, something break out?
Probably the place you least expect, because that's always the place where it ends up being. And Africa would probably be a good candidate for that at this point, because it is becoming the proxy for China-U.S. struggle. And it has been for a decade or two. It's been simmering, but it's coming to the fore a little bit more. And we're starting to see these operations. Hey, the U.S. is in Niger. What's going on? Why are they there? What's going on? Oh, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Concentrate over here. So there's definitely there's buildup happening there, and there's going to be a butting of heads at some point in the near future.
Well, Saudi Arabia really just represents. I mean, it's going to add its business interest, or somebody can get. God, is it 800 billion that they seized from these guys that they arrested and seized their stuff?
That's the number they're reporting.
800 billion, not million, billion, right?
That's almost, hey, that's enough to buy a city in the desert.
Right. So I'm just going, is that what we're trading off, these dozen guys? Screw them, man.
Yeah, I guess so. For people who don't know about this, just look up NEOM, Neom, which is Neo, and then M, I guess, is the Arabic, like the letter for something or other. I don't remember. But anyway, so it's some kind of neologism that they're creating. And just look this up. So it's a $500 billion city that they're going to create out of nothing, this mega city that is, so it's going to be crazy in every possible way. And you should go and watch the actual, the kind of announcement press gala thing they had at their little conference at the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton a few weeks ago, where Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was talking to the various people there, including Masayoshi Son of SoftBank here in Japan is going to be one of the partners in this project. And there's an interesting little part where Masayoshi Son says something to the effect of, we're going to create a second Mecca. And the whole crowd just kind of gasps. And MVS is like, oh, he doesn't mean it like that. He doesn't mean it like that. But they're talking about things
Beatles,
like...
That's like the Beatles coming to America and saying they're more popular than Jesus.
It doesn't translate well. Let's put it that way. But so they're talking about these crazy ideas, like they're going to take the literal sand from the desert and create whatever silicone wafers out of this sand and use that to create the solar panels that are going to create the electricity to power the city and all this, crazy whatever technology they're talking about that's still quite theoretical at the moment, I think.
Is that a delay tactic? Is that showmanship? Is that...
it's projects like these. I mean, let's put it this way. There are people involved in this that are just in it for the money. I mean, I think at the top levels, that's not what it's about. But there are people who get in, like the Masayoshi Sons or whoever, who get into projects like these that just see they're going to be spending hundreds of billions of dollars. Yeah, I'll put my straw into that trough. Thank you very much. So I think there's a lot of, crazy ideas that get thrown around, and we'll do anything, just give us the money.
The other thing that I learned from, reading your article and some research is that Saudi Arabia, since the oil prices have started to fall, they've been bleeding money. This is, they really were living high on the hog, man. They're gold-plated toothbrush bristles, man. I mean, this is getting, kind of ridiculous. So all of a sudden that starts going away and they're so overextended. I'm wondering if they're freaking just financially.
They are. Saudi Arabia is bleeding reserves at this point, and has been for a while now. Because as people remember, 2014, the oil price started plunging, partly because of Saudi helping to target a lower oil price, I think along with the U.S., and it certainly did its job in targeting the Russian economy. We've seen some destabilization and some devaluing of the ruble as a result of that, ultimately. And of course, Venezuela. We see what's happening in Venezuela, enabled in part because obviously their oil revenues were decreased. But I've never understood why Saudi Arabia ultimately participated in that, because of course it also affected Saudi Arabia, and they are bleeding reserves, and they have been for years now. And as I go through in that article, that you can see all the various ways that this is starting to affect the economy. They're starting to come out with austerity budgets, and they're starting to increase cigarette taxes and, float the idea of other types of taxes.
How's the rest of the Middle East doing on this? Because I know that, it was like UAE, Dubai, he's been generous. Kuwait, they gave a stipend to their citizens every year. We found out about that in the first Gulf War, and we're like, what? We're fighting what? So this is kind of common there. What is it that they're paying for in Saudi Arabia? I mean, how much are they getting? Do you know? I mean, heck, Alaska citizens get $2,000 a year for Alaska oil. So I'm going, Saudi Arabia probably gets more than that. Do we have any idea how much that is?
I don't know, but I think it's not just a question of a single payout. It's the combination of everything, including the fact that they don't pay income tax and all of that. So it's all compounded, in all the different programs that they get out of this. And I think everyone
they get subsidized gasoline and energy and a bunch of other stuff.
Exactly, everything subsidized, everything.
Yeah.
It's easy street for a lot of people, and I think everyone knows that. I mean, I think this is part of the overt buying off of the public. So you guys, you leave the House Assad and these princes with their insane lifestyles. Yeah, what are you going to do? You guys have it easy as well.
I'm making, James, is like, one thing that I'm feeling. Everybody, you look at. All right, I'll tell you this. There was a documentary. It was an Oscar-winning documentary. I think it was 1980 or 81. I think it was 80, and it was called "Toward Liberty." The Carl Hess story, and it was Carl Hess was the speechwriter for Goldwater back in the 60s, and he went anarchist. And a film group out of Boston University or something did this documentary, one short documentary, 20 minutes, and boom. And it was done really well, but it was anarchist, more of a libertarian style. But at the time, they didn't really get that. They didn't really understand. They thought they were, espousing the thoughts of this great anarchist that was more progressive. And as they got older, they realized what was being used. A bunch of libertarians, what he said, and they didn't want it to go on YouTube. And they kind of, they do copyright violations and pull it down. But now it's up there and there's nothing they can do about it, But that documentary made it very clear to me that I forgot where I was going with that. It was a good documentary. You guys should go watch it, But I'm hoping that we're in a phase of understanding this from a long time, what this battle really is about, because I think it's going to reset after the House of Saud goes. It'll be the money, and whether they go or not is just, it depends. I'm afraid they're, well, I'm not afraid, but I think that they may be going towards other banking systems, other banks, other countries, other markets, and leave the U.S. to deal with the baggage and the loss of the support for the petrodollar. When that happens, there's only going to be philosophy and save me and come fix it for me of the people. And I'm just wanting to make sure that we understand what happened and who's waiting to catch us because they love us so much and exploit and take advantage and restart the cycle. So before we end, we got 15 minutes. Can you, help me with that and try and get what we should look for or do, or is it metals or digital currencies, or who we should look to see as the first signs that this is happening, and help us, James.
Well, as I just did a podcast episode on this called "The Saudi Purge is a Global Crisis," and the ultimate conclusion of that is that the real action we have to look forward to with regards to this is the China-Saudi relationship. I think that's going to be the backbone of whatever new system or paradigm emerges from this, if it is allowed to emerge, and that's, I guess, the other fundamental part of this question. But we've seen in recent years a growing Saudi-China relationship that's been cemented. I think over the course of the past year, King Salman went to Beijing for a state visit, where he signed $65 billion in various trade deals with China. And President Xi also went to Riyadh, I think last year, and they did a bunch of trade deals then. And I think President Xi even oversaw the opening of a refinery in Saudi Arabia, but a Chinese-owned refinery. So that is clearly the backbone of a new relationship that could be the thing that upsets the petrodollar. And since we haven't formally stated that in this interview, for people who don't know about that system, people should look into the history of this idea that, as I was talking about that Yom Kippur War and the oil crisis, that led to the creation of the petrodollar system, whereby Kissinger basically did some shuttle diplomacy and worked out this deal where the House of Saud was going to price their oil in dollars and was going to recycle that money back through the U.S. banking system in the form of treasury purchases and, arms deals.
Okay, now that's one thing that when they do the treasury purchases, this is where I think they have us over a barrel, but that's no threat of them doing that. Is there some kind of control that we exert in some way that they can't sell it, or it's automatically renewed, or they don't really control that deal where the part of the money goes into our system? I'm just, it seems like we're so vulnerable there.
That's an interesting part of this whole thing, because one of the interesting things about the petrodollars, when you go to research it, you're going to find there aren't a lot of actual, like, hard research or documents that you can dig into about this, because everyone's known about it. It's been talked about for 40 plus years, but it hasn't been officially acknowledged, or it's been parts of it have been officially kept secret. And in fact, it was just last year that Bloomberg finally got some FOIA documents that showed this 41-year-old deal, this debt secrecy deal that was part of this whole package, that Saudi Arabia's reserve purchases, or treasury purchases, would not be reported. Or at least would not be reported as Saudi Arabia. It was in some big basket of, like, miscellaneous purchases or whatever. It was part of the deal. The secrecy was written into it. So there has been this whole big shroud that's been placed over this for a long time. And when they unleash that shroud, I think their holdings are something like $750 billion of treasury purchases, which is, again, is quite large. It's up there. Not quite China's 1.1 trillion or whatever it was, but
you don't refi the debt. You know, the people that did that don't do it. Stuff happens. That's just the way it is. Well, Trump going and visiting them is this? You know, is he like negotiating this? You know, because it could happen on his watch. You could have all the deep state going to them and say, make it happen on his watch. And he doesn't want it to happen. He's going to do. See, there's something else going on, and we don't know about it.
Yeah, clearly there's a lot of deliberations that go on behind the scenes that we'll never see. You know, we can only see what ultimately results from them. But I did a video last year that people need to watch. It's called "Why is the MSM Finally Reporting on the Petrodollar?" where I go through this, and I go through the implicit threat. I mean, even the fact that last year they decided to unveil this, 40-plus-year-old secret about the Saudi Arabia secret, quote unquote, about this Saudi Arabia debt purchases, even that is some sort of dagger that's being held. Like, okay, we'll start taking the cloak off. We'll start showing people what's under the kimono, or the Saudi, robe or whatever. In that video, I went through the idea of the $750 billion that they could dump on the treasury markets, and would the treasury markets be able to withhold or withstand that? And in fact, the answer may be yes, unless it was done all at once. That could have an effect. But in fact, over the past year or two, China has decreased their purchases to the extent of $780 billion. So the markets,
somebody increased. Who increased? I mean, I've seen a lot of.
It's a good question.
The Fed, the Fed buying stuff.
Yeah, the Fed.
The Fed's this and one-to-one dollar to the banks of you got, and now it's in a reserve. So when the 08 happens again, it won't happen, because now you got these reserves that we owe, and we'll pay you interest on it if you'll kind of keep this big giant buffer money, so that we don't have to bail your crap out, next time again, and that'll be enough. Pinky swear. I'm just the one thing that I wanted to get back to when we did. We'll finish on once I do this, and we can talk about whatever you want. But I wanted to get this in. When they made this shift to MBS, as opposed to who was in secession, the brother of, King, what's his name to begin with, I'm going, what was the timing? What was the reasoning for that? And you opine here that when the CIA blocked the United Arab Emirates and Saudi attempt to overthrow the Emir of Qatar, or Qatar, or whatever some people say, I call it Qatar or whatever. So the Emir of Qatar. So I'm going, why would they want to overthrow him? I still haven't had that clearly stated what the reason was. And then why would the CIA want to block it or get involved? And if they pissed off the king and he all of a sudden puts his son in, oh, yeah, well, he's in now, SOB. Here, let's rock and roll. And they go, so is it like this MBS is against the CIA and the old guard and the Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, all that kind of crap? And Trump's trying to coddle up to him and be a liaison, a representative, setting him up. You see what I mean? There's some weird dynamic going on there based on the reasons behind the CIA and the Emir of Qatar attempt. What was going on there? Who were the interested party?
Well, the ringleader of this apparently was Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who is the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. And he is is touted as the mentor of MBS, and perhaps the string puller of what's going on in the region generally. So that's something that needs to be dug into a little bit more. But this story about the UAE and Saudi attempting to overthrow the Emir of Qatar and that being blocked by the CIA, all of that is coming from Pepe Escobar, who reports for the Asia Times Online, and he has this source that's close to the House of Saud. I don't know who this source is. There's no way to vet it. I mean, how do you know? It's just an anonymous source, so take it for what it's worth. But this is the story that they're attempting to paint, which is that, as you say, there was this attempt to overthrow the Emir of Qatar. Why specifically the Emir of Qatar? Why now? Why at this point? Is it because Qatar is just vulnerable at this point and it's kind of a power play for, regional dominance? Or is this about some greater geostrategy? Qatar now kind of aligning more with Turkey in that kind of resistance block. For people who haven't seen, I just did an interview with Sharmeen Narwani talking about the Middle East in general and this resistance block that's forming, that's obviously Syria and Lebanon and Iran and Iraq.
Okay, a resistance to what?
To just Saudi Arabia, Qatar, U.S., Israel, Turkey, who had been trying to go into Syria. And clearly that didn't, after 6 years, they haven't quite got Assad out of power. So the resistance is everyone on the other side of that. Now, interestingly, Qatar and Turkey seem to be peeling off of the Saudi axis and being more, not quite aligned with, but maybe more amenable to the resistance bloc. And that has to do with the Qatar-Iran sharing the South Pars oil field, which is one of the largest reserves on the untapped reserves on the planet.
Now they're starting to develop it. They're on the two different sides of the Persian Gulf. Is it like angle drilling down underneath the Persian Gulf or something? There's a pool of oil?
Well, I think they actually share the actual contiguous space of that reserve. It goes across both waters.
Oh, okay. So underneath it's like a big lake and it's on both sides of the whatever. Okay.
Something like that, yeah. So they both have access to it, and they're both looking at ways of developing it jointly, which is interesting.
Well,
and of course,
what is in the way of all this? See, I'm still not. I don't feel like somebody's wanting to squash their boot on somebody else, and it's just an excuse outquitted of somebody didn't do what I wanted to do when I wanted them to do it, and you diss me and didn't give me my props or something, so that they could have. Is it conflict for the raised oil prices? Is it conflict for land? Is it conflict for power? Is it debt? The U.S. Is it influence of China and Russia? Is it? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
but the implication, I think, of that would be, well, Qatar and Iran working together, clearly, well, that would be, for Saudi, that would be horrible. Iran, I mean, they're already...
Okay, now why would it be horrible?
Because, again, because of the power play in the region, Saudi Arabia wants to be the dominant. Iran is a major competitor for that regional dominance. And the other factor in all of this, with the Islamic Revolution and what that represented in Iran, is the potential end of the House of Saud. Because if that happened in Saudi Arabia, it would be their heads on the chopping block. And, whoever, whatever religious authority comes to power or whatever. And the House of Saud has always had that in mind, worried about that to some extent, that, they're in a precarious situation that has been smoothed over with oil money. That's drying up. They see the writing on the wall. Their heads are potentially on the chopping block. So the Iranian threat is kind of the idea of this threat of, well, what if the people rise up against you? And the Iranians, their idea is the Iranians want to spread that to the whole Gulf. They want all these monarchies gone.
Oh, okay.
The monarchies are saying, it's against us.
All right. Well, hell, that's all you had to say, man. Crap. I get it. All right. So Iran represents the, United States to France aristocracy.
Well, the Islamic version of that, I guess.
Yeah. No, I mean, you had, them damn Yanks and Americans out there declaring their independence and revolutionizing against the largest known empire in the universe at the time, save God, the British Empire. And they got some, and the French kind of helped a little bit. We went and helped, and then all of a sudden our people wanted their own freedom and started lopping our heads off, and that sucked. So then they're going, well, this whole concept of revolution, democracy, blah, 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 and there it goes for a century or so. We got to get this thing back in the bottle. Well, they have these states created ever since World War I and on, and Sheik, you're in charge or whatever. We just need somebody to sign a contract to say how you borrowed on your natural resources, and that's how all our oil got underneath your sand because you got an airport for it, and whatever, and it just happens all over again and again and again. So but when you have a resistance movement, and they call it this, the resistance, countries or bloc or something like that, and you have how evil and bad, and a lot of bad history in the Middle East is U.S. screwing around in the Middle East, starting one of the main areas with the democratically elected, was it Mossadegh or something in Iran? And then was it 53? James is better at dates on this
TP
stuff.
Ajax, 1953, Kermit Roosevelt overthrew Mossadegh. Yep.
Boom, see? So the thing is that they know that we're the bad guys. Well, the one country that the people rose up against a corrupt Shah, that I remember in my days in the late 70s, when all this was going on, the hostage crisis and day 382 or some crap like that, Ted Koppel and Nightline, every night you're going to, and then, Carter in seclusion and his Malay's speech. I lived through this. It was an emotional thing. It was got to go get some. So it's, now you have this country that embarrassed the West in general, certainly the United States. And it was as a blowback of this, we're going to take all your oil and do it, and this rich guy here gets it all, and he's oppressive to you and put you in the dungeon and rendish and kick your butt and torture, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the people rise up with a little bit of religious support and, so on, that's kind of finding its own equilibrium now. But they represent this across the middle. Then you had the Arab Spring. Arab Spring goes, it was an economic thing. Now it's going to happen again. And they see it coming. And what I guarantee when they talk about Iranians influencing these different groups or whatever, man, it's just like the North Vietnamese. You're going in there and training and, having them get an education class and this and why and whatever. You don't even know who on our side hell is helping. It's just to keep consternation going. And I can see now that we had this conversation, I can finally understand why. I go, why are they so, who gives a crap about Iran? Why are they? It's what they represent. It's that light on the hill kind of thing. Somebody can resist and overthrow the big empire or whatever, and the man can't stand that. And Afghanistan doesn't have like a national soccer team or anything. They're just tribal. They go Afghanistan country flag. What? What are you talking about? Oh, that's Kabul. Go over there. So they can't conquer. They're not like somebody would surrender. It's like, well, those wusses, Hatfields over there on that side of the hill, they don't got no chutzpah, man. We got to kick some butt. So this is what I'm seeing is happening. And it's just now that I finally get it's a threat of rebellion in the spirit of the people there. That's what they're afraid of. That's why they're going after the Houthis in Yemen. That's why they can't have Assad not being on the bank to sit and be one of their boys and inside the club. That's why they got to get Iran. That's why anybody and everything that has anything supportive by or for or to or with or, in partnership with Iran, which going to be China, and Russia. And so, it's getting to be messy. They better just give up, let it go, and peace be upon thee, come back America, So how far off am I, man?
I think, well, that sounds like what the general picture there. And you'll notice that all the people who have been targeted and taken out are the usually secular, usually military-esque leaders of these nations, going back to Nasser and all of that.
Yeah, the kind of guys that could be bribed.
Well, yeah, but the people who were not... you'll notice that the U.S. and their allies have always cooperated with the Gulf monarchies and people like that because they're the easiest ones to keep in line. And so the monarchs know that relationship has worked out well for them, but they fear the idea of people revolting against them. So that is part of it. Just to add the other layer of conspiracy to this, because, it's the Corbett Report, it's what I do. The Ayatollah Khomeini had a secret back-channel communication with the U.S. going back to the 1960s. So he was not necessarily the actual, the real resistance that people might have thought he was. There was a greater game going on there as well. But at any rate, that's the way that people see it or feel it.
Yeah, no, and that's really, it's all the perception reality thing. Now I can feel like we can, wrap it up and you get to say whatever you want and warn and all that kind of, because I was not going to leave this conversation. I wasn't so concerned about all the details and stuff change all the time anyway, and you can't really tell who's. I just couldn't get my mind around what the hell is wrong with Iran. Why they don't even speak Arabic? They speak Persian. Was it Farsi or whatever Farsi, the heck? Yeah. They don't speak Arabic. I guess some do, but they're a whole different culture. They have a different history, a different, focus,
They're
and
not
more
Arab.
modern.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're more modern. They're, Western allied. They want blue jeans and Elvis Presley albums. What the hell is going on? Now I understand. It was just the light of rebellion, a successful one against the West to free Muslim people from the clutches of blah, 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 blah. That is dangerous. It makes much more sense to me now that it's all this little stuff. They just invent these excuses. It's what kind of inspirational impact it has on the people they're trying to subjugate. And if you have that, that becomes a factor. And when they get stronger with economic deals with China. I remember they did, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of oil for gold with India. And this was just the last few years. The man don't like that.
And when they tried to sanction Iran, they did the oil for gold swap as well. And that was a big part of all of that with Iran being delisted from SWIFT, the International Banking Communication Network. They took all their banks off SWIFT and, okay, deal with that. And so they said, okay. And so they started swapping oil for gas. So
they opened their own oil bourse. They have, I didn't even know what the hell a bourse was. I go, what's a bourse? It's French for purse or something. It's like a stock exchange or a commodity exchange. So they did like a commodity exchange, for oil in Iran. They go, we're open for business, and we'd be taking euros too. So I'm the U.S. The tighter your fist, the more star systems go out between.
Okay, so this is how I want to wrap up: is to tell people that this is exactly what is happening. The more the fist gets tightened, the more that people find ways to get out of that grasp. But that is a perfectly predictable result of this fist tightening. There's no way that the policy planners and whatever, the string pullers of they, then those, do not understand that they don't. Of course they understand this. And of course they know that the inevitable part of encircling China and Russia with NATO is to drive them into each other's arms. That's what's going to happen. So they know that this is happening. They see it happening. I think they're fostering it in the same way they fostered the rise of China as an economic power so that it now does have geopolitical clout. Again, this is all foreseen. I don't think this is all by, oh, wow, we wouldn't have ever imagined that happening. So my real point in all of this is I think they're setting the stage for an engineered conflict. I think this is going to be the narrative they want to bring in, and that's
big. Is it just to kind of move the hockey puck down into certain kind of course corrections, or is this that's a whole new game? What?
Well, let's put it. Yeah, let's take the big picture, because it is a new game that's coming very soon. And who articulated that quite well recently was Putin, who said that the first country that develops artificial intelligence will be the leaders of the world, and the rulers of the world, or whatever he said. And he's right about that to a certain extent. The technology is now coming that whoever gets first dibs on the coming technology is going to rule the whole game, and to an extent that wouldn't have even been thinkable even in the unitary superpower era. So that's the real long game that's going on right now. And in fact, it may not even be that long, because if the Kurzweils and others of their way get their way, it'll be, 12 years to the singularity? I don't know about that, but it is coming, and it's coming a lot faster than people think. I think this is one of the most important issues that people aren't thinking about right now, is this whole machine learning, artificial intelligence, autonomous robot thing.
I'm only afraid of it as much as I don't get to have a say. It's like Musk saying, man, it's coming. Here it comes. And if we don't get in open source of we get to upgrade or self-plug and we don't have a chance, because here it freaking comes. So I'm like, the only way that we can have any kind of positive impact are the people that are doing it, that they're infected with the freedom philosophy of not be a scumbag. Take over the planet, switch is not engaged, or not put in or something. I agree with you, James. This is really, really, really dangerous. And I don't think people understand the danger of turning your life or your security or anything over to something that has the ability to kill you or allow you to be killed or distract you from or be overtaken or controlled or what. And I don't like that. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I sure as hell don't want somebody else control of it, Internet of Everything. If we got, a punch card that knows who needs to have their robot kill them or something. I vote not that. So the only way I think that we can protect ourselves is not turn over, nannying our child to an android, not turn over Skynet to artificial intelligence, not turn over our car. I know we're going to do it. But they're just going to deliver you up to the man when they need you. I want a manual override, damn it. And so it's coming, and I'm with James. We got to be careful about artificial intelligence. I think it's coming, but we got to have a philosophy and a healthy understanding of the threat it is.
We do, and I think you're right. Ultimately, again, if this is an ideological battle, then the way that we win that is by spreading the ideology of the other side, the non-collectivist, non-oligarchs, the people who are about individual freedom and liberty, and that mindset is in the minds of the people who are the minions who are creating this Skynet or whatever. Then perhaps we have a chance of shunting this off in a different direction. But otherwise, we know where this is going, and I think that's why
I see it. I see it in the Bitcoin space, in this digital crypto. I go to, speak at these, different events with Bitcoin and such. And I can see the only freedom that we're getting is not the guys that have the venture capitalist money to hire developers to massage their idea into shoehorning blockchain into the legacy banking system and the compliance effort of the app of, Uncle Sam's Happy, the developers, they just give me a paycheck. I can code wherever you want. Oh, you need to do that? Fine. But you need them to understand, the ones that are capable of writing this stuff that create, Bitcoin to begin with, that they understand there is a need, a desire, and a market for decentralized, open source. You can't stop it. They can't see it. They don't know. None of their business. Pirate communication. Because if you don't have that, we are going to be screwed, and it's going to be a lot faster than people think. And I'm thinking the third letter of Captain Mark that we did for our pirateswithoutborders.com thing, we made it clear. We're going, the real goal of the crown is to make you incapable of dissent. You don't even want it. You don't even recognize that you should do it. That's when they win, and they'll do whatever they can. But the power that they get is what we give them, or the money that they make. And they're making that money based on eliminating competition, supporting, their buddies, creating rivals that don't exist so you let them take your freedom for security. And it's all just to control you and exploit you as cattle. You're just livestock. So what James is doing and understanding, I've gotten so much life and experience and activism that a lot of the lines weren't connecting. And one of those lines we got tonight was, what the hell was with Iran? Now I understand. It's a spark of rebellion just in reputation. They got to be made corrupt, and they got to be made ineffective, and they got to be made wrong, and they got to be made to freaking submit, and they got to be made. Syria kind of represents the same thing. So and I don't know what the hell North Korea is. That's just there to play some weird piece in the game. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that another time. But I think for my audience that's listening to this and that doesn't listen to your show, they should, because the work you're doing in interviewing the developers and the activists and the people who are involved in this space of developing these new technologies and either arguing with them or drawing out this liberty philosophy in those people is so important. And I'm so glad that you're there doing that and highlighting the work of people who are doing this in the right way, like Cody Wilson and others who are, who are on that cutting edge, that are doing incredible things with technology for liberty. And that's going to be important, whether you like it or not. That is exceptionally important going forward.
And it's why I don't emphasize a lot of the stuff that I enjoy having you on, and it scares me, a lot of the things that are happening. And the more I understand it, then you uncover the secrets, expose the lies, the fear goes away. And the technology that's available and what's going to happen in the future, which is why they always want to con you with more prosperity and look how we're going to live like the Jetsons if you only pick me, which is what's going on in Saudi Arabia right now. They always twang on the future hopes and aspirations and imagination of people and the youth, and they'll get another 20 years out of you. Now they did it with the space race. They do it with, a bunch of other stuff. So I'm glad we had this talk. I appreciate you staying, or coming on early there. It's, kind of evening here. This is a good time of weekend for us to do this. But I didn't want to prepare anything. I just wanted to go over this and get your opinion, and you and I talk without commercial interruption. Because if I could understand, I really feel I got something out of it. Thank you, James. This concept I couldn't figure out. Iran, what the hell? Now it's more clear to me. I understand. It's it's iconic almost. So I get it. And for all of your listeners, I'm glad that you're helping James, because to tap on all of you as volunteers for humanity to have this window and this opportunity for us to find out from your work, that is such an ad. And as an old activist from the 90s and so on, we had faith that you would exist and come along and do exactly what you're doing. But it was in short supply back in the day. Thanks, James, for coming on. I'll let you go, brother, and get to your family. But thanks for doing this. I feel a lot better.
Well, thank you again for doing what you do and for being there for the decades, even the pre-internet era, if that can even be imagined right now. It must have been a hell of a lot more work than it is now for people like me. So I do appreciate the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, buddy.
The Corbett Report is brought to you by the Corbett Report subscriber, a weekly newsletter featuring James Corbett's International Forecaster editorial, recommended reading and viewing, discounts on Corbett Report DVDs, and once a month, a subscriber-only video. Sign up today to start receiving your copy at corbettreport.com/support.